This is the Transcend in Life podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson, taking you from fear to freedom.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Transcend in Life. I'm really excited about today. Someone I have got a chance to know over the last couple of months. Gina London is the CEO of Language of Leadership, an Emmy-winning former CNN correspondent and anchor. Gina guides the top companies and executives in the world to connect and engage with their employees, their board, and themselves more positively. She provides interactive and motivational keynote speeches on the power of communicating with purpose and impact. A published author and a regular media analyst, Gina has appeared on the BBC, Fox, and CNN. Gina has interviewed on radio and TV across the world and currently writes a weekly business leadership column, The Communicator, in Ireland's largest circulated newspaper, the Sunday Independent. Gina, you have quite the resume. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, JM. It's good to be with you and your listeners and viewers. And, you know, it's funny because it's American accent. So I am American, but I have been living in Ireland, as you said. So I write for a newspaper here among the clients that I serve. But it's great to be talking to a fellow American and feel like through Zoom, we're bridging the distance.
We've certainly done that. And you and I have connected a couple times. I love what you're doing. Give me a bit of maybe the short version of how this American ended up over, abroad across the pond, as we say, and in Ireland. You have quite the journey.
Yeah, I'm grateful. Thanks for that, JM. I'm grateful because when I was with CNN, I was domestic. So I didn't have the luxury I didn't have that as my portfolio of traveling all around the world to report on news stories. I was based in the US, largely in Washington. And then after my career with CNN, I had an opportunity to go and work in developing democracies and emerging markets, to work with lots of different issue campaigns there. For example, I worked with the first Iraqi women who were running for parliament. I worked in Cambodia for a period with a really great group of youth organizers who were trying to get out the first immunization awareness campaign, which is, of course, very interesting in the time of pandemic that we're in now. But that gave me a real love of travel and these kinds of heightened awarenesses that you can develop when you meet new people and you learn about the things that are impacting them, or really similar to the things that are impacting me or us. And it really starts to begin to make the world seem smaller, and how we can communicate and connect with other people be really similar in many ways. Cultural differences, yes, but some real commonalities. And I think that's where the light bulb went off for me that, oh gosh, this can help anybody from any walk of life. And then I had an opportunity right after my daughter was born to relocate to Paris for a couple of years. And I was largely in mommy mode, but I was also getting opportunities to do a little bit of consulting here and there. So that's where it's sort of branching off into consulting, helping, advising, some media training, and then it got into really what I do now, holistic communications awareness in an incremental building way. And now I've moved from France. I lived for a few years in Italy. My daughter then became school age. And JM, I went, you know what? She's a global kid now. She's got this awareness and speaks another language. And I could go back to the US, which I love, or I could look for an English-speaking country, because my Italian's okay, my French is okay, but it's not enough to do business in that language. I could look for an English-speaking country and find a place to raise her full-time. And I kind of tossed a coin between the UK and Ireland. And when I met some people in Dublin in Ireland, it just became real obvious that it's a great place to do business and it's a safe place to raise my daughter. So that is the roundabout whirlwind tour of what has brought me full-time. It's been 5 years now that I've lived full-time in Ireland. My daughter, who was 9 months old when we lived in Paris, is now 12.
Wow. So you've really set some roots in Ireland, which I've been to Dublin a handful of times. I've been very fortunate to visit. Beautiful city. Yeah. I love the country, so welcoming. And one of the things you talked about is the world is shrinking. And that certainly feels that way. Like us connecting on Zoom. Cool. It's almost like we're in the same room. We're not, but it's close. It feels that way. Yeah. But talk to me a little bit, because the unique experience of being able to visit these various, you mentioned 5 or 6 different countries and communicating with purpose and intent. Obviously, cultural differences, people communicate way differently in different parts of the world. How do you adjust, I guess is my question, and really, because it's important for communication for all cultures, but how do you adjust that message to that culture?
Yeah, and I think thanks for that. And I think the answer to that is important and applicable in any setting. Curiosity about the other person and respect for their perspective. So the curiosity part is I don't bring my, oh, well, in America, we do it this way when I go into a new place. Or why don't you make a hamburger? I want a hamburger. Why am I having to, what is this on my plate kind of thing? That I want to have a curiosity about. Tell me about your food. Tell me about your plants. Tell me about your history. Tell me about your government. Tell me about your architecture. Tell me your stories. That's what got me into journalism in the first place, because I had this real insatiable curiosity about other people's lives. Some people would say it's very, very gossipy and nosy, but really I'm curious of other people's stories. And then that respect is not to judge and not to say, like I said already, well, we did it this way. And a lot of times when you travel in a different country, as much as I used to, I mean, I haven't traveled anywhere in 7 months, but when you go into, like, I spent a lot of time in Nigeria in 2015 and 2016, and almost everybody would say, well, how does this compare to your other countries or another country? And I always say, no matter where I am, that I don't judge a country as a country. I meet it one person at a time. And I think that's really important in life, is that you can overgeneralize in all sorts of different ways. But if you can try to meet a person, one person at a time, I find that it's a way to build rapport. It's a way to make common ground. It's a way to make relationships.
It's a good way to look at that because when people have asked me, I've been very fortunate to travel a lot of the world. I don't think quite as many countries as you, but I've seen a lot of the world. And when people ask me what was your favorite place, I do go back to the people. I will tell you again, why do I love Ireland so much? The people are so friendly. Now, are there some bad eggs? Of course there are, just like there are in any country. Costa Rica stands out to me where beautiful people, so happy, just the nice. Thailand was that way. But to your point, you connect with one person at a time. That's really a different way to look at that. And one of the things I wrote down is you seek to understand, is how
Yeah.
I read that. You really want to know more about them. And I bet you that just gets them talking and connecting with you.
Of course. I mean, and this goes to communications, connecting strategy. And again, I don't like to make it sound so strategic that it takes out the human part of it and makes it sound manipulative or exploitative, because that's not the point. But when you think about human behavior, to what you just said, people want to talk about themselves. What's the best way to get somebody talking? Ask them a question about themselves. And then don't be waiting for that pause after they're done speaking so that you can one up their story. Ask a follow-up question. And it takes discipline, because we are wired, I think, to want to jump in and share our story too. And to become more, as you said, of a seeker to understand really helps with the discipline around asking more and more questions. And I find that is helpful, not just in international travel, but in day-to-day living, in connecting through a Zoom call. Don't try to sell right away. Try to get to know the person and give them an opportunity to share about themselves. And just really in any situation in business, the more I think that you can try realistically and with purpose to get to know the other person or imagine the pictures in their head first, it's going to help you in whatever you're trying to achieve.
Was that something that you learned and I actually don't know. I guess I'm assuming you studied journalism in college. I'm not sure. Is that what you studied?
I did. I was an Indiana University grad, so the great state of Indiana, the old crossroads of America there. I often call it the belt buckle of the Bible Belt for obvious reasons, too. I went to Indiana University and I majored in political science and journalism. You are right.
So is that where you learn to really ask those questions, or is this just something that you naturally just progress? I
Well,
guess
I
it's
think
maybe
I
a little bit of both.
gravitated. It's a great question. I think I gravitated toward journalism because of my curiosity and my desire, as I said, to just learn about the world. And I used to read newspapers voraciously before everything was googly and you could just be staying on the internet. I actually made my mom subscribe to 3 different newspapers on a weekend so I could look through them one by one, page by page. But when I got into journalism, yeah, then you get to structure. Then you start to think about the inverted pyramid style of writing and what's your lead and how to construct a story and how to approach an angle and what's your hook and who are the people you're going to interview and where are you taking the story and how does it fit in the context of the greater story and all those types of mechanical, fundamental, structural components of craft. And I really love learning structure around concepts. So we talk about communication, we talk about personal relationships, we talk about purpose-filled living, we talk about any of these concepts that help us have a better life. And I like to break them away from the why it's important and the what is it to the how do we do it.
So let's talk about the how you do it, because you talk about communicating with purpose. And I definitely I want to get your take on this, because I feel most miscommunication happens because the lack of intent or purpose. So as as you say that, I'm just curious, how do you coach people on that? What is the basic, because obviously we have X amount of time today, but what is the basic way for you to explain how to the power of communicating with purpose?
Yeah, thank you very much. And the first thing that I like to do is get into a fundamental methodology. And don't forget, as I mentioned, I come from journalism. I didn't learn about this fundamental methodology, putting things into modules and all this sort of speak until I was really required to do it, because when you're trying to train a group of people that are running for parliament, as I mentioned in Iraq, you can't just start rattling off all these things you sort of picked up through your CNN career. You have to sort of put it into building blocks and methodologies, as I mentioned. So my fundamental methodology, to answer your question, and I like to break everything down into the power of three, because I know personally I can't remember anything more beyond 3 points to any sort of presentation. So fundamental methodology, you can begin applying this from day one in every communication event. And I always like to say that we're never not communicating, and everything is a communication event. When you start thinking like this, then you can add this strategy. It's 3 letters, A-I-M. So it's taking aim every time. And the letters stand for, real simply, audience, intent, and message, in that order, for a reason. So your audience, who are you talking to? Who are they? Is it one person? Is it JM? Is it a group of people? Where are they from? Are they new hires? Are they senior employees? Are they male? Are they female? Are they other? Are they whatever? I mean, getting into who they are. And then the most important thing, as you're preparing for the particular thing you're planning to say or the interaction you're going to have, what's their hopes, dreams, and fears? Every single person, I believe, or I'm convinced from the work I've done, nothing that we say lands in a neutral setting. It's either building that relationship or it might be pushing it back. So when we take ownership of that, we really want to get into, again, the hearts and minds of the other person and think, what are their hopes? What are their dreams? What are their fears? And then you can, hopefully in a positive light, appeal to the hope part and reassure on the fear part. But you know yourself, there are communicators that prey on the fear. But getting into the mindset as much as you can and understanding, try and understand, as you said, seek to understand who your audience is. Secondly, I'll go more quickly. The intent is often one that is overlooked. And this one's really important, because if you're going to have an event, like you and I, before we began this, said, hey, what do you want to talk about? We had a little discussion around where we might want to take this. If you're just rocking up to a call, or you've got a sales call, or you've got some meeting, but you haven't actually sat even for a minute to say, what do I hope they get out of this? Is my intent that I just get a yes for a second meeting? Is my intent that they're going to do something with this? The I doesn't stand for information for a reason, because the information can just be thrown out at somebody, but what do you want them to do with it is really important to understand, especially if you're trying to do a presentation or a meeting with a number of people. Please talk to each other beforehand and say, hey, what's our unified intent or our goal, or what's our outcome that we want from this? Because I guarantee I've been back when we were in rooms, and not just Zoom rooms, I've sat around with senior leadership team members and said, okay, we're going to roll out this whole big whatever. What's your intent? And I go around the room and each of them have a different take on it. And it's phenomenally awakening to think, wow, if we hadn't taken that moment, to unify. How are we going to support each other? How are we going to be in alignment? Once you've decided who your audience is and what your intent is, then message. Too often, I mean, I had a CIO of the largest construction company in the world. Go Google it. You'll figure out who he is. And we were working together, and I said, well, what's your message for this particular interview? Well, I know my theme, and I've got this idea. I'm like, no, but what are your 8 words or fewer, which it really should be, that you want your audience to take away and remember and know that's your core message. That's the core takeaway. That's the how you get them to do that intent. And it is too often left to chance. It's sort of generally hemmed and hawed and and stammered around and well, we can't. Or how in the world, if you can't articulate it, do you expect your audience to articulate it? That is my breakneck, fundamental, full-on easy lesson for applying AIM every time. Audience, intent, and message. Oh, and when you get that message word crafted at the end, practice it out loud, because you want to be able to internalize it so you can say it seamlessly and with compassion and emotion when you're delivering it. There you go.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now I have so many questions, but when you said the 8 words, because ultimately we're taking an idea from our brain and we're trying to verbalize to the audience, and you want them to get, but you really simplified that by saying, all right, 8 words or fewer, tell me what you're going to say. And if you can't do it, you're not quite there yet. That's really interesting. Is that something, so for you personally, so you do this AIM, do you write it down? Is that your first thing? Do you verbalize it? What's your process? Because that sounds so simple, yet getting something down to 8 words, that's way more complex, you guys, than saying 80 words.
Yeah, I'm grateful because I've gone through the rigors of 24-hour news for as many years, almost 10 years that I worked with CNN, so that I'm actually fast at crystallizing, as I call it. I can look at almost any script, any big document, any presentation and go, what's the crux of this? What's the takeaway? What's that number one high level message, which is what I do for clients. I mean, thank God that's job security for me. It does take some time to develop it quickly, but it's worth the effort. Because even though I do usually the A and the I in my head. The message, I will always wordsmith, and I'm pretty quick at it now, but I will always write it down, and I will always work to get off script. Because, for example, you mentioned that I do a lot of media analysis and stuff, and now the election in the U.S. is coming. And since I'm a former White House correspondent with CNN, they dust me off around political season, and I get to do a lot of commentary here in Ireland as the former correspondent. So I've been doing, and I will be doing a lot with the election. But I try to practice what I preach, and the times I don't do this, it bites me. I wordsmith. What's my pullout quote? What's my takeaway? What's my condensing of whatever it is we're being asked to talk about? Is it latest polls? Is it the debate? Is it some other thing? I often talk about leadership and connection in the time of pandemic. I've been talking a lot about that too. But what's my message I want the audience to get? And that's why just today, one of my coaching clients, she was on a podcast. They had a 1-minute little cutout for her. And in it, she was asked a direct question. What is cultural recognition? Her answer was about 4 paragraphs long. There was not one solid 8 or fewer words that you could pull out and say, that's what it is. That's an area of opportunity to be able to craft that so that you can deliver that as a headline every time.
Yeah, I like the wordsmithing idea. And I guess I'm saying to the audience, you're not crazy by talking it out. And in the car, right? Like driving around, you're talking and yeah.
And when I used to be doing radio bits, I'd be driving my daughter to school for the school drop off. And I knew I was going to be on an 8 o'clock hit, but I knew a couple of things I wanted to get across. So I practiced those lines out loud. Now, this, again, it's not about being disingenuous or being overly rote or overly canned, but it's knowing, internalizing, muscle memorying your lips and your mouth and your tongue so that when they ask you the question, you're ready for the answer. And you can use this for an interview preparation. You can use this for sales and prospecting, as I already mentioned. You can use this for how do you want to collaborate with someone? Do you want to promote yourself? All these types of applications are real and instant if you think about it beforehand, try to anticipate what the questions will be, wordsmith that message, understanding what their emotions may be at the particular time you're meeting. And it does accelerate your opportunity to influence your career path or your interactions of success with others.
Well, you said we are always communicating. And when you said that, immediately I looked at, what you said, connect and engage more positively and even listening. That's one thing I will say. When I talk to you, you are clearly intentional with your listening. You are trying to hear the words that I'm trying to say to you. That is a learned skill. There's no question about it. So is that part of the connect and engage more positively? And I hate to make it so simple, but I am trying to seek to understand because I want to communicate even better. That's something I practice and work on. So I guess it's a very selfish question. Is that part of the connecting and engaging more positively?
Absolutely, JM. And first of all, this idea that it needs to be more complicated is a misnomer because it's the simple, consistent approaches applied over time that help us better connect. And as you said in the intro, to others and yourself. Purposely talking to yourself in the morning when you wake up. When you and I met, one of the times that we talked, you talked about how you purposely will meditate and you will purposely get into box breathing and you'll purposely think about your mind and your body and your spirit and how it's connected. And that really impacted me. So we think about how we communicate all the time to others and ourselves holistically all the time. If we're really frustrated and we've got that scowl on our face, not only is it sending body language information to someone else, it's also sending it to ourselves. If we make ourselves smile when we're ready to kill somebody else, and figuratively speaking, of course, it will soften us. And so we do sometimes have to do behavioral things to impact our neural pathways. We have to sometimes, before we think it, we have to do it. These are the whole approach about how do we demonstrate purposeful communication. So if I'm listening to someone, I purposefully will try to look at their face. It's difficult in Zoom because you and I talked about we're looking at our webcam, not at the screen of the other person. But I'm trying to really listen to what you're saying. I'm trying to listen to the tone of your voice. And this takes focus and it takes practice and it takes purpose. Over time, it goes from deliberate to default. But I talk a lot about, again, we're always communicating. Is it by default or by design?
So you said holistic, and then you also mentioned nonverbals, and you even gave the smile analogy. I remember I was a communication major. That was one of my majors, and psychology in college. So my question is nonverbals to verbal. You've always heard it's like 80-20, 90-10. Do you have a definitive answer on that? And then
yes, dude, I do. And I can actually, I'm ready. I just talked over you. That's a bad thing. I should have done.
No, you're fine. I'm talking back over you because I want to hear your answer, please.
Yeah, I'm gonna right now, for all your listeners and viewers out there, I'm going to dispel what is called the Moravian Myth. You'll often hear bandied about, and I don't remember the actual percentages. It's something like 56, 37, 5. Don't do my math because I'm horrible, but it's a real low percentage on the content as it's related to a bigger chunk to the vocal variety, that's the tone, or the body language. Wrong. Why? Because this guy, Albert Moravian, he's still alive. He's a professor emeritus over at UCLA. In the 60s, he conducted two separate tests, which is where this percentage comes from. What's interesting about his test, he had a sender and he had a receiver. And the sender would give one word to the receiver. There were 9 words total in the first test. I don't remember them all, but there were 3 that were positive, like dear, 3 that were neutral, like maybe, and then 3 that were negative. But depending on the tone, like if I say to you, dear, or if I say dear, obviously you're taking from my facial expression, my tone of voice, that second one was negative and angry. Now, it gets extrapolated into this whole thing that big presentations, large interactions are only 5% content, and the rest of the percentage is your body language and your vocal variety. Well, no, because if you've ever tried to listen to a foreign language film in a language you don't speak, and there's no subtitles, and you're trying to pick up the entire context of that film, especially if it's dialogue driven, and you've only got body language and tone, I challenge you to tell me what's going on.
Very fair. Very fair.
Okay.
So
But
do we
it's
have
not to say,
sorry.
but it's not to say that they're not important. That's the takeaway. Don't get hung up on content doesn't matter, because content does matter. Words matter. But do know that words in a monotone, devoid of any emotional expression, are not going to be received the same way as if you deliver that same piece of text with thinking about the power and the emotion behind the words, thinking about what your facial expressions and your gestures and your postures say about you while you're delivering, because we're all expert body readers, but few of us are deliberate body language signal deliverers.
So it truly is holistic. I guess that is the like, be intentional about all of it. Your words, the way you deliver it, your I guess your tone, and then certainly your body language, I guess, so that they all tie together. There is
They're interconnecting all the time. That's right, Jan. When you agree and acknowledge that communications is everything, that you're never not communicating, and again, that your communication is either moving you forward or backwards in your relationship with any individual, then there comes a responsibility attached to that. So then how do I become more purposeful about it? And again, it's not about becoming mechanical, but some of these mechanics, especially for people that are really introverted and they need a set of instructions, they actually require or really feed off of that. It helps them where they don't feel, oh, it's just natural. She's just naturally that person. Sometimes, maybe, but it's probably been that natural style that's been reinforced that therefore makes it deliberate. Or what someone who is more introverted starts to apply some of these, ask more questions, make your face light up, nod your head when they're talking. They become ingrained in you, and then you become perceived as that more connecting person, which then changes those neural pathways and actually makes you that more connecting person. That's the transformative power of breaking it down into little incremental, actionable steps that becomes the new holistic, purposeful communicator you.
Well, it tells you there's a lot of practice to be had. So working on these three things, it's like, look, work on your words, work on your nonverbals, work on your tones. It's so important. I want to shift gears just slightly because you brought up something earlier today, and you said communicate with fear. That obviously media gets that rap where it's like, this sells, excuse me, because it's terrible. I mean, it's awful.
Yeah.
And you know, the agendas are out there. It's just true. I don't know how to dispel it. But how do you, especially journalists that got in, they want to deliver news. That was the intent, right? That was, you want to give information about what's going on in the world. How did we get to this place where people don't know what to believe or trust? Do you have a good answer for? I'm just curious.
Now, there's a lot to unpack in that question, JM. Let me see if I can take it a little bit of a time. Then, first of all, the notion that, as you've heard said before, if it bleeds, it leads. If there's going to be a potential hurricane or forest fire, wildfires in California, we're going to be talking about it. The media is going to be talking about it all the time, around the clock, because that's what the viewers are good. That's what the numbers will show. And that issue in of itself, I'm not excusing it, but there is a validity to the idea that the normalcy, no wildfires, no shooting, doesn't get covered because that's not news. It's the aberration that makes it news. The good thing is that if there were shootings every single day, all the time, I mean, if we were inundated with it, then that peaceful day would be the news. So that's one thought. I mean, it's usually the aberration that makes the news. It's the unexpected that makes the news. And unfortunately, that seems to be not occasionally the 110-year-old woman who's the eldest woman in California getting her birthday party or something like that. There are happy stories. But there was a really great, I don't have the details, but there was a news station in Florida years back that tried an experiment to do happy news. And that was their mantra. That was their new PR campaign. And their numbers fell dramatically. They didn't get the viewership. And so it turns out that when things are on our mind, sometimes we go to that. Now, back to your question, though, about the agendas and trust and fake news. And if everybody's equal, if a blogger from Minnesota in their grandma's basement has the same validity as a researched article from the New York Times, what is news? And I would try to urge your listeners and your viewers to try to understand the professional process that some organizations have that some don't. Even if you don't necessarily think that the leading is for you, try to look past that and find the core essence. Check out, for example, The Guardian is a British magazine, a British outlet, but it has a lot of the fact checking and the professional editorial process and that sort of process going into place, as opposed to some random guy tweeting. And I'm meaning that not in the White House. I'm trying to stay very political in this, but consider the source, consider the second source, and try to read a variety and try to be an informed critical thinker. I think that's really something that is lacking for a lot of people. And it could be an essence of time. We're all busy. We're all checking our feeds and whatever our bubbles are. We tend to stay in those echo chambers and keep in those bubbles. But if you can discipline yourself a little bit, if you spend 5 minutes looking at news, spend 1 minute out of the 5 looking at an alternative news source, just to try to see if there's a middle ground or something you can fact check against one or the other. Does that help?
No, it helps tremendously. And I love what you said, like, hey, expand your, look at CNN, look at Fox, look at CBS, BBC, look at them all and get your own informed opinion. I think what's happened is obviously the internet's amazing. Social media is awesome, or can be, but it's also brought this baggage along where, to your point, some dude in Minnesota, no offense, Minnesotans, but
yeah, no offense, Minnesota, that was picked at random.
But some person that is just, it's some opinion without any research, that can come out and it's not facts just because it was on the internet. So
yes,
it's interesting.
And that's why sometimes I actually really try to find some fact checking sources. My mom, God love her, and if you're listening, Mom, you know I do. She will often get one of those forwarded emails from one of her lovely bridge or church friends. I don't know where it comes from originally, but it's been forwarded. And it's invariably one of these just outlandish folk tales or urban legends or something. And you go to Snopes, go to a couple factchecker.com, find these places that will at least initially, before you press forward to some other group of friends and you perpetuate this type of stuff, see if you can maybe be the one that says, well, let's take a breather. Let's see if we can second source this. If there's something that can debunk this, let's find out before I start going off and spreading it as truth.
Yeah, there's a funny little bit in So I Married an Axe Murder where his mom is reading the Globe and he's like, that's the paper. My poor accent there. But anyway, you talk about connecting with people, and you've had this opportunity with some pretty incredible people that you've interviewed, you've spent time around. I'll give you 1 to 3, the most inspiring people that you've personally spent time with, because you say you connect with them, and I've done that personally with you. You've done it with some pretty remarkable people in the world. Is there 1 or 2 that really stick out in your mind?
Yeah, there's a great story that I'm looking forward to sharing with everyone right now that comes to mind when you mention this. And I think sometimes the way you see a person behave when the cameras aren't on, or the way that you can see someone when they think you're not recording or you're not taking notes or they're not on the podcast, that tells a lot about a person, right? So years ago, really just a few months before she died, I had the privilege of being, not as a reporter, I was a production assistant, but I was in the same room in Washington, D.C. with Princess Diana. And this was an event at the Red Cross in Washington, D.C. with the head of the Red Cross at the time was a woman named Elizabeth Dole. And I can't. I think she's still alive, so I hope she's not listening because this is not a great story for her. But the story goes that they were going to be coming outside and presenting about awareness about landmines, which was Princess Diana's one of her last causes. And Lady Dole came down and Princess Diana came down from different doors in the exact same purple dress. It was a light lavender, I think it was Givenchy suit with a skirt and a matching sort of top thing. And in an instant, all of us that were plugging in the malt box and getting ready for the program, and I was with a lot of other videographers and things, we all sort of did this like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Well, what happened was this. Elizabeth Dole's face went red and her face, talk about body language. There was no content there. You didn't need it. She was furious that she hadn't been informed or they hadn't compared notes or whatever. And you could hear them. They came together and greeted one another. And Princess Diana said, well, look at us. We'll be two lovely lavender fairies. Because she was fine with it. She was relaxed with it. She was really the people's princess at that moment. I think I wasn't a royal watcher. I wasn't that in tune to her life story. And much later did you realize all the different things going on. But at that moment, I think you get to see the heart of a person. And P.S., if you ever Google the pictures of them at that event, Elizabeth Dole did go back and delayed the event and did go back and change. Which
I love that.
I'm sure she probably regrets that, since that was one of the last public appearances by Lady Di.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not that serious. I love that. Princess Di just goes with it gracefully and like, hey, you have great taste.
I know. That's what I would have said. I would have been overjoyed to be in a photo for the rest of my life wearing the exact same dress that Princess Diana was wearing. Oh my gosh.
Hashtag winning, my goodness. So what's on the future for you? You've published, you're interviewing. I'm just curious, like you're doing some amazing things out there. You're impacting the world. What's the future hold for you?
Thank you. That's my mission. And that really, in all seriousness, the more people that I can, when that light bulb moment goes on and you're being able to tell someone, here's how to be clear, here's how to be brief, here's how to purposely connect. And you see them say, oh my gosh, I can do this. That is my mission in life, is simply to help other people be more confident and comfortable about how they connect with others and themselves, pure and simple. I'm grateful that what I used to do, like yourself probably, and many of others that are listening to this right now, I'm grateful that in-person training and speaking and coaching and developing and support can now be done. It's never going to be a substitute, but it is something. And I'm grateful that I'm being able to do that virtually. You and I connected through LinkedIn, and now here we are virtually. I think continuing to find ways to support, continuing to find ways to broaden the impact is a goal for me. I do have a book in the works, and a literary agent is going to begin shopping it out next month. Hopefully we'll coming to a bookshop near you in the summer on developing your authenticity. The appearance, behavior, and communications, the ABCs of connecting with other human beings. That's the working title anyway.
I can't wait to see it. And also just what you said, I'm grateful. Guys, there are still things to be grateful for. So much out there, and you continue to show that. Gina, I love what you're doing. I so appreciate being with you on this. The other times being featured on your article was amazing. How can people connect with you to learn more about you online?
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. There's a number of ways. First of all, I'm on all those social media platforms I just talked about: Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Please find me. I would really, really be grateful to connect with you. It's the Gina London or Gina London over on LinkedIn. Also, I do have, and I'm delighted to share that a lot of my clients have been asking, especially during this time, how can we get more? How we like the coaching, but we want more. So I have had the opportunity to develop a learning platform. It's videos, it's incremental, it's bite-sized learning. It's a program called Language of Leadership. You can find it at languageofleadership.org, and it can really help you incrementally skill up, heighten your awareness, put into practice some of these things that we've talked about today. Because I do know that it can be overwhelming to hear all of this at once. Like, oh my gosh, I got to think about what I'm wearing and how I'm smiling and how I'm connecting and the questions and preparation. And that's a lot. But just like learning to play an instrument or speak another language, if you break it into increments and you apply it over time, you can transform yourself. So languageofleadership.org.
We will link all these in the show notes, you guys. You definitely check her out. She is an expert. She is a pro at this, but she's also, and I say this in all sincerity, she's so humble. You were like the most normal, humble girl from Indiana,
I was just going to say, I'm a kid from Indiana.
And I love that the Midwest values have never left you. You're just an amazing person. And I thank you so much for your time today. You are awesome.
Thanks, JM. Thank you so much. Take care.
You as well. All right, you guys, until next week, continue to transcend in life. We will talk to you again next week. Have a great one. Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. That helps us build this community, and that is what we are all about. Building this community as big as we can, helping as many people as we can, and deliver as much value as possible. Be sure to head over to transcendentLifePodcast.com for information on my coaching courses, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Let's Go Win 365. Let's go win and transcend in life.
This is the Transcend in Life podcast with your host, J.M. Ryerson, taking you from fear to freedom.